And we continue at 2:06 in the afternoon. Talk Radio 790 KABC, The John Phillips Show. Broadcasting live from the Morongo Casino Resort and Spa Living Room Studios. Mr. Randy Wang has the day off. He'll be back with us on Monday, unless his flight gets canceled, he's in Salt Lake City, and he decides, why should I get on a plane and go back home? Let's take a look at the temple. 800-222-KABC is the telephone number, 1-800-222-5222. It is my pleasure to welcome our next guest to the program. He is a former assistant U.S. attorney and the former chief investigative counsel at the U.S. Department of Education, Paul Moore. Welcome.
Hey, John. How are you? Happy Friday.
Happy Friday to you. Thanks so much for stopping by.
You bet.
Let's start out with the big news in Washington, D.C. surrounding New Jersey Senator Bob Menendez, who is attached to a story I'm sure he'd want absolutely no part of if he had his way, and that is an allegation of influence peddling for a foreign government, specifically in Egypt, where he was caught to have gold bars and envelopes full of cash and all kinds of things that don't look good to the naked eye. What do you make of this story, and where do you see the things going for the New Jersey senator?
Well, it's not a good day for him, and you would think that he would have learned something from the Biden family or the Clinton family. It's like you need to set up some dummy corporations and pass-throughs with the kids and the grandkids and who knows who else. And so he was sloppy. He should do it the way that's proven to work. And after his previous trial and the Department of Justice dismissing the case ultimately, they don't like to do that. And so you would have thought that his antenna would have been up to be a little bit sensitive. And when this new girlfriend came around in 2019 and introduced some great Egyptian friends of hers and said they'd really like some help on this, that, and the other, that he would have said, maybe we shouldn't be accepting these envelopes of cash and gold bars and sticking them in our things, so really dumb. But this is what a corruption case looks like. And the DOJ, when you look at the cases against Donald Trump, you wonder if they've forgotten what a real corruption case looks like. This is what it looks like.
Now, people are focusing on the gold bars that he had. And I say to myself, okay, that's funny because it looks like it's very Pirates of the Caribbean-ish with, the chest full of coins and the chest full of gold bars and those sorts of things. But when I think about the corruption cases that have happened here in Los Angeles, what they look for is they look for things of value that are difficult to trace. There were two city council members in Los Angeles who got in trouble for essentially taking poker chips. They were at a casino, and developers were giving them poker chips, and poker chips exchange hands from one person to another all the time. That's not something that's really memorialized, so it's something that's difficult to keep track of if you're the House or certainly if you're the government. And when I look at the gold bars, I say to myself, okay, there's no electronic record of one gold bar being transferred from an individual to a senator, so they probably thought that they were outsmarting the government.
That may be. I mean, it's something that aspiring criminals ought to keep in mind is that they're usually not the first ones to have thought of a way to cheat, and the government is usually pretty good at figuring out kind of the low end, obvious ways to do things, and this is one of them. And I'm actually shocked that Senator Menendez, and by the way, reading the indictment, it notes in the first paragraph that he's a senior senator from New Jersey. It fails to point out that he's also the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, which is a big part of this. And I thought it was kind of odd that DOJ would leave that out of the indictment. But he's occupied this very significant position of power, and for a long time, and as the indictment alleges, he's used it and benefited terrifically from it. So makes no sense at all, and really, really clumsy, dumb. If you're going to be a criminal, do it better than this, please. And then there we go to the Biden family. It's like, call Hunter. Hunter can not only think, he can give you some good advice about this stuff. So come on.
Well, wasn't Hunter trying to use the diamonds as something of value that could change hands from one person to him?
I think that's the case. I mean, it's and a number of other things, and but that's Hunter. That's not Bob Menendez, and DOJ had a chip on its shoulder for having gone after Bob Menendez before and lost, and so it was all in. And I'm sure that the effort that DOJ has commendably brought against Senator Menendez, I'm sure that they've been at this for several years now.
When you were an assistant U.S. attorney and you would get a public corruption case, or someone in your office would get a public corruption case, how often would they come knock on your door and go, Paul, you're not going to believe how stupid this one was? And then they show you the details and you all have a good laugh.
Most of the time. I mean, most of the time. And that's why I say it's like, people think they're the first to come in. There are no new sins. It's all been done. And, honestly, the thing that troubled me most was that I think that it was usually the clumsiness, the kind of failed effort, the poor effort by aspiring criminals that usually led to them being discovered. And so, I guess we're fortunate that hopefully most criminals don't learn to be better criminals. So we're fortunate in that way. But yeah, I mean, it was really dumb luck a lot of the time that the government found out about something, or that a corporation where there was embezzlement going on discovered. It's really usually someone being sloppy, and that's how it came to light.
When someone ends up on the government's radar, people always ask this question. How does it happen? Is the government surveilling people like U.S. senators all the time, and they see something that doesn't look right and then they really pounce on it? Or is it something where they monitor the newspapers, they monitor the chatter, and it's the papers and the chatter that the government follows?
All of the above. And I mean, if something makes news, then certainly it's, people at DOJ read the papers every day. They know it's in the news. And they also, as I said with Senator Menendez, he was certainly forewarned that DOJ was interested in him. So I would say there's a heightened interest that would have gone back several years with him. And so, it kind of blows my mind that he would have engaged in this behavior since that previous trial. I mean, this is absolutely stupid. And he ought to know, better than most U.S. citizens, because he's in the, he's a senator. And I mean, of course, there's a lot of people in Washington who, for good reason, think that the laws don't apply to them, and they can take millions in Chinese money from anonymous sources, and no one's ever going to say anything to them about it, and DOJ is not going to investigate it. That happens. So maybe Senator Menendez thought he didn't have to worry right now.
Last question before we move on from this topic. When you would be investigating public corruption among elected officials, is it typically the ones who had been there a long time and just got very cavalier with their ethics who were engaged in this sort of behavior? Or if you're a bad seed, you could be a bad seed on day one and just try to sell as much influence as you could right out of the gate?
That's a tough one. I mean, it's both. There are a lot of, and I also worked for the governor of Rhode Island before I was a prosecutor, and Rhode Island's a state that, I mean, it would make you blush in terms of the crime that had gone on there for decades. And my boss, the governor, was the former U.S. attorney there, and so I mean, he basically, Link Hammond was his name, and he had a mission for us. He said, "No trouble. We're not going to do anything wrong." And for Rhode Island at the time, that was a high bar. And but I mean, the degree to which people in the administrative state, as we call it now, that there were good deals. I had someone high up in that very shortly after I came into the governor's office came to me and said, "Hey, I hear you've been looking for a new car. I can get you something at cost, no problem." And this is someone who's in and out of the governor's office every day. And so and I said, "No, thanks. I appreciate it. I'm a simple man, not ready to embark down that path. Thanks a lot." But there's a lot of reason that people in positions of power and feel insulated. And I mean, as I said a moment ago, all the money coming in from China and other countries, kind of benefiting politicians in both parties very significantly over the decades is extraordinary, and they don't fear, and they have reason not to fear.
Just think, you could have had some of that sweet action.
And what I wanted was a Crown Vic. He should have said, "What? Really? The police have one? It's just that you get one for $4,000. Don't bother us with that. We thought you had more class. Come on." Yeah, that's all I wanted. Nice Crown Vic. Put a Sunroof in it. I'll be great.
We're speaking with Paul Moore, who's a former assistant U.S. attorney and former chief investigative counsel at the U.S. Department of Education. Paul, it seems like a lot of people who were some of the key players all through COVID-19, whether it's Gavin Newsom or Anthony Fauci or fill in the blank, they are out talking about their postmortems on how they handled the pandemic. And it seems like most of them are speaking in very general terms. No one will say, I made a mistake by shutting down the schools for over a year, or I made a mistake by shutting down the golf courses and the beaches and outdoor activities that we know are safe for people to engage in even during a pandemic. They just say, I should have been better at communication, and I should have been more willing to reflect on my decisions, those sorts of things. But one of the subjects that has not come up in any of the interviews that I have seen so far is anyone, particularly at the federal level, saying we shouldn't have been playing around with that lab in Wuhan. We shouldn't have been playing around with the Chinese on subjects that we have no business engaging in, particularly at the university level, which was going on certainly at various universities here in the United States. You have written about this quite extensively. The fact that in the postmortems they are not highlighting what went wrong with our relationship with the Chinese, how much should that trouble us?
I think it should trouble us greatly, and essentially what you just said. There's no accountability. I mean, if you're in government and there are major policy decisions or if you're someone big that no one will touch and untouchable like Anthony Fauci, that people don't dare question. So what if you sent money to the Wuhan lab and things like that? I mean, I think the American people would be shocked. They're probably beyond the ability to be shocked at this point with what they see happening at the southern border. But I mean, just the idea that federal grant money is going to universities in China and all over the world and other universities in China that are engaged in, something like, developing the virus that perhaps a byproduct of their efforts, but that killed 1 million Americans. There's no accountability. After 9/11, there was at least a 9/11 commission. Of course, what was the result? There was no, maybe there shouldn't have been one person held accountable or 2 or 3 or 10 or whatever. But I mean, what they actually did then was create this huge new bureaucracy, the Department of Homeland Security, right? So, but there's not even a 9/11 commission attempt to look back at Wuhan. It's like, okay, what were we doing? Where were we involved? What are our scientists up to? Is there something we need to look at here? And I mean, this is just screaming for that kind of effort, and there's nothing. No one will start down that path, even with the Republican Congress House right now. You would think that there would be an interest in an effort. Of course, they have their hands full with so many other investigations, and that's understandable.
Whenever I bring up the lab in Wuhan and say that we participated in the funding of what was going on in there in a variety of different ways, people tell me I'm a conspiracy theorist. They ask if I got my information from Alex Jones and wear tinfoil on my head. And I say to them, no, this is not coming from InfoWars. This is something that has been written about in publication after publication. We know that we had involvement in what was going on in that lab. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's the truth. As someone who worked at the U.S. Department of Education and worked very closely on this subject, can you verify that that is not, in fact, a conspiracy theory?
It's not. You're exactly right. And I mean, it's open source material. There's certainly ways for people to verify this. We investigated the University of Texas. We initiated an investigation at the University of Texas for its involvement with the Wuhan lab and the university there. And essentially, as many other universities have done before, they helped set up the lab. They offered their expertise. They bragged about it publicly. This was, of course, before the virus hit. But American expertise, and that's a very unique biohazard research facility. There's a handful of them in the world. And the U.S. has tremendous expertise in knowing how to set them up and handle them. And basically, UT's Galveston National Laboratory folks have terrific expertise, and again, they publicly had stated their involvement in helping set up the lab with their expertise in Wuhan. And it's just, the truth is stranger than fiction. You just kind of can't make this stuff up. I think the University of Texas is one of our better universities, and they actually view themselves as an American university, and had a tremendous concern and cooperated very well with all federal agencies that had an interest in their involvement in Wuhan. A lot of universities in America wouldn't do that. They would give us the middle finger. And I'm not going to name names, but Harvard and Yale. And, this is despite tens of billions of dollars in federal grant-making money. That's from the American taxpayer to these universities, who then go set up research labs affiliated with Chinese universities, for example, where we basically hand over the R&D that we're developing. And the Chinese are not stupid; they're very smart. And this is all part of their 10-year plan by 2025 to acquire and be a leader. And they acquire the best research and technology that they can as quickly as they can, and by any means that they have to. And as Christopher Wray, the FBI director, has accurately said, academia is a soft target. And the Chinese know this, and they send students and faculty who are collaborators with our students and faculty at some of our best research institutions, Los Alamos, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, all over the country. And they're obligated by the Communist Chinese Party to acquire the information and expertise that they then bring home, and which, frankly, is then used against us and is being prepared to be used against us.
And these are just the ones that we know about. They also have spies in places that we may not assume that they have them placed. And probably Eric Swalwell slept with half of them. But we've caught them over at Stanford University. We've caught them on Dianne Feinstein's staff. We catch them at the tech companies. They're all over the place.
Yeah, that's right. And they're just this week at the UN, Joe Biden gave a speech where he said that we're not looking to decouple from China. And, the Chinese must just love this. They could have written a speech. He said we want to de-risk, but we don't want to decouple. So, people saw during the pandemic how dependent we are, our supply chain, on things coming from China. Our medicines, all sorts of things, electronic components. And so, if Germany had been this smart before World War II, we would have a very different world today. If the Japanese had been this smart before World War II, I think the Chinese had learned from those times, and they've said, we're going to use the capitalist system against America. It's their weak spot. They'll put up with it if we know how to play them. And they played us like a fiddle. And so, we're in a state of maximum peril right now. And I think that it's not just a matter of the Chinese taking Taiwan. I think that the Chinese have a lot of leverage points against us and the operation of our society, really, economically and otherwise. That they're going to have us, over the barrel if we try to stop what they plan to do in Taiwan and other places. So I think we're in some rough waters, and we have a lot of people like the president. They literally gave Janet Yellen, mushrooms to get her high when she's over there, and we said no problem. We've sent 4 cabinet officials over there, hand in hand, bowing to the Chinese, the totalitarian regime that's responsible for killing 45 to 60 million of its own people, and we're over there sucking up to them. And so is American industry, just like it did, frankly, with the Germans before. IBM. Standard Oil of Indiana, a great company, but Ford, we're deeply engaged in the German economy. We have to expect that from our business people, but we should expect from our political leadership that they're going to stand up for our national security interests, and that they're going to force our universities to clamp down on this nonsense and stop the flood of our technology out of the country before it's completely too late.
Well, I'll tell you what else China was able to successfully do. They essentially established the fact that any criticism of the Chinese government was inherently racist and out of bounds. So if you criticize the Chinese government, you criticize them for not sharing information with us in the early days of COVID-19, whatever the case may be, that you were being racist, and they shut it down. And it worked.
Exactly right, and I mean they're great consumers of they understand who America is and our and how we turn these kind of arguments against ourselves to silence each other, and they do it. I mean it was I back in July I appeared before Congress to testify on the topic of American universities and foreign influence, and several of the Democratic members actually used the CCP's talking points, what you're saying, and said, oh, it's anti-Asian hate to say we need to object to what China's doing. It's just insane. And, fortunately, there's some very good leaders on both sides. There are more Democrats now that are actually showing up on this issue, not the president, not the administration, but there are some members of the House on the House Select Committee that are actually doing a good job with their Republican colleagues in calling this stuff what it is. And we need that to happen. It happened in the Cold War, and that's probably why we were able to be victorious in that. But it's desperately needed right now. But they're up against an administration that, frankly, is doing the work of the Chinese Communist Party.
It seems like Pelosi is harder on China than Biden is. Do you think that's because there is such a large Chinese population in her district? She has to do that because it won't play well at home if she's coddling up to the Chinese government, or do you think it's something else?
I suspect you're right. I mean, there are a lot of people in San Francisco who fled Red China, and Boston has a huge population of people who in the 50s and 60s fled Red China. And so, I mean, historically, that's definitely the case for a lot of Americans. And, I'm glad, whatever the reasons are, I'm glad that Nancy Pelosi had the nerve to go to Taiwan and to defy, the Chinese threatening her physically. If she went to Taiwan, threatening America physically, and it's like, and Speaker McCarthy should do the same thing. And I mean, our leaders who go there to Taiwan and say, no, don't do this. We need to be doing that, and we need to be fearless about it. So thank goodness that she's willing to stand up on that issue.
Paul Moore, former assistant U.S. attorney and former chief investigative counsel at the U.S. Department of Education. Fascinating stuff. Thanks so much for stopping by. Have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you, John. You too.
If you want to email the show, you can do so at johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. That's johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. There's been a fight in Washington, D.C. as to what the dress code should be at the United States Senate. Not for the people who work there. That hasn't changed at all. But if you're an elected member of the Senate, they changed the rules so that John Fetterman can continue to dress like he's a tour guide operator on the Jungle Book cruise at Disneyland. In fact, I don't know if you've seen it, but there's a picture of him presiding over the U.S. Senate, dressed like that, showing off the tattoos on C-SPAN 2. The senator from West Virginia, Joe Manchin, has started circulating a petition to change the dress code requirements back to the way they used to be. Who knows what'll happen? They just certainly want John Fetterman to be happy because they want him to show up to work because they need his vote. The U.S. Senate is very closely divided. So here's my question to you at 800-222-KABC, 1-800-222-5222. If you were hiring someone for a professional job, you've been accused of a crime, and you need a criminal defense attorney. You are an actor or an athlete, and you need an agent to go into a corporate boardroom and represent you. You're hiring an accountant who may have to represent you in front of an IRS agent and plead your case. Whatever the case may be, you need to hire a white-collar professional for a very sensitive job that needs to be done correctly. I would assume if you're a member of the U.S. Senate, that's a sensitive job, and you need to operate at a very high level. If you were accused of a crime, would you hire a criminal defense attorney who dresses like John Fetterman? If you were going in front of the IRS, would you want your accountant to be dressed like John Fetterman? And if you were up to star in a big budget box office Hollywood production, would you want someone dressed like John Fetterman sitting across the table from Harvey Weinstein? Well, maybe not him, but you get the idea. Would you hire someone for a white-collar job who dresses like John Fetterman? 800-222-KABC, 1-800-222-5222. We're taking your calls at 800-222-KABC, 1-800-222-5222. There's a fight going on right now in the U.S. Senate as to whether or not they'll relax their dress code so John Fetterman can dress like a tour guide operator at the Jungle Book Cruise at Disneyland. My question to you at 800-222-KABC is this. If you had to hire a white-collar professional to represent you, whether as a criminal defense attorney, an accountant, an agent, whatever, would you hire someone who dressed like John Fetterman? I certainly wouldn't. Let's begin with Rick in Los Alamitos. Rick, you're on KABC. Hello.
John, great program. No, I would not hire him, and I would show my cousin Vinny when Fred Gwynn jumped all over John Pesci for his appearance in court.
My friend Dale actually wrote that screenplay for the movie My Cousin Vinny, and I'll give you, if you're a fan of that movie, I'll tell you this. He's writing a Broadway version of My Cousin Vinny that he shared some of it with me, and it's going to be absolute gangbusters when it goes on Broadway.
And I loved it, along with all of the Utes that participated in the movie.
Always have to give a shout out to the Utes. Thank you for the call, sir. I appreciate it. Let's go to John in Thousand Oaks. John, you're on KABC. Hello.
Johnny, if I were, well, it's hard to reach the level of incompetence that Elmer Futterman has reached and set a very low bar for us. When I was a DA downtown, I was not as incompetent as Futterman, but I was not the star trial attorney, so I had to dress in a manner that would give a power impression. So I wore the most traditional conservative cut suits with vests and gave people the idea that I knew what I was doing. So I had a slight advantage, at least going in before I opened my mouth. If Elmer at least dressed professionally, he might be able to say a few things that people would listen to that otherwise are completely disregarded at this point. And I sent you an email with a picture of Elmer and Anton LaVey, who was the Church of Satan founder a number of years ago, and it's striking the resemblance they bear to each other. I was wondering if that's a coincidence.
Well, I'll tell you, I think you're 100% right. Whatever it is that you're doing professionally, you have to look the part. If you don't look the part, you look out of place. And if you don't believe me, just go do your shopping over at Target wearing a red shirt. Everyone's going to start asking you questions and barking orders at you. If you're a U.S. Senator, have a little pride in your work. Look like a U.S. Senator. This guy looks like he's part of the Army in Grenada.
Well, he doesn't even look that good.
That's very true. And if he was part of the Army in Grenada, he'd be wearing shades. Thank you for the call, sir. I appreciate it. 800-222-KABC is the phone number, 1-800-222-5222. If you had to hire a white-collar professional, would you hire someone who dresses like John Fetterman? I wouldn't. What say you? 800-222-KABC. Programming update. I'm going to be on Newsmax later on this afternoon, sometime the 4 o'clock hour. Kimberly Guilfoyle is sitting in over there. I'll be there talking about John Fetterman and some other subjects. Also, our pal Doug McIntyre is going to have a book signing this weekend on Sunday at the Barnes & Noble in Burbank between the hours of 2 and 4. You can show up and hear Doug read a passage out of his brand new book, Frank Shadow. He'll sign a copy for you. You can take some pictures, whatever it is that you want to do. You'll have a great time over there at the Barnes & Noble in Burbank on Sunday if you want to meet Doug McIntyre in person. Right now, we're taking your calls at 800-222-KABC, 1-800-222-5222. Would you hire a white-collar professional to represent you if they dressed like John Fetterman? I certainly would not. What say you? Let's go to AJ in Oxnard. AJ, you're on KABC. Hello.
John, good afternoon. Thanks for taking the call. Hey, real quick here. My CPA dresses like an absolute bum, but he's an absolute guru at what he does. So he could be wearing a Borat bikini for all I care, and I still hire his services. He is amazing. In the case of Fetterman, however, He made it, but he still has to fake it. It's the only thing he's got going for him. He could at least, a couple suits here and there. Come on, man. He's not that great, and his speeches are incomprehensible and utterly incoherent. That, again, a suit might help him out a bit. So, thanks, John. Have a good weekend.
Okay, thank you for the call, sir. I appreciate it. I'll tell you this. People make first impressions right away. It happens all the time, especially when the stakes are high. I don't know how many of you actually show up to jury duty. It seems like everyone around me just throws the summons in the trash. I go. And when I show up to jury duty, you sit there in the room, and at first, you don't hear from the defendant. You don't hear from the attorneys. The only person you hear from at first is the judge. The judge tells you how long the trial's going to be. The judge tells you what type of case it's going to be, whether it's criminal, civil, whatever the case may be, and they just run through the basics. It's only until they start picking the jury where you start hearing from the attorneys. But the first thing that I do when I go to jury duty and I'm sitting there is I'm observing everything around me. I'm looking at the criminal and I'm thinking to myself, okay, what are they accused of doing? Do they look like they could have done something like that? Or do they look like they wandered into the wrong room, and how dare you accuse this nice person of that? You look at the judge. How does the judge look? Doesn't look like Judge Judy, more like Judge Wapner, making that mental note. And then you start looking at the attorneys. You look at the DA, you look at the defense attorney, and you decide very quickly whether you like them or not. Sometimes you just don't like the cut of their jib. Sometimes you take a liking to them for some reason or another. Maybe it's the way they dress. Maybe it's the way they comb their hair. I don't know. I don't know what turns you on. I don't know what turns you off. But we make these split-second decisions all the time. But DAs and defense attorneys look a certain way in our mind, as do judges, as do criminal defendants. And if they don't look like how you're expecting them to look, you make split-second decisions. Now, maybe you're very low-key, and maybe seeing someone dressed like that is something that impresses you. Good for him, showing up here looking like he's working at Disneyland. Or maybe you look at him and say, this guy looks like he doesn't know what he's talking about, and that will cloud your judgment of them the whole time they're talking to you, and it doesn't matter what they say. You've already made up your mind. I wouldn't want to be the defendant with an attorney who looked like that, who created negative impressions with the jury. Let's go to JD in Ventura County. JD, you're on KABC. Hello.
Yeah, John, let me say this. I have a real estate business. I'm also a real estate attorney. So I think it's kind of a no-brainer what you're asking about the dress. What I think is, to me is even a bigger question is, how did a state elect this man over a physician with a businessman and an MBA? We have a guy here that's practically incomprehensible when he speaks, and they elected him over a physician. And now this clown shows up for work in, his sporting outfit. It's just unbelievable. As an attorney, you will never, ever see anybody that doesn't show up in court trying to make the best impression right off the bat based on the way they're dressed. And to think that this guy got elected over a physician is just, who the hell lives in that state?
Thank you for the call, sir. I appreciate it. That's going to do it for us on this Jimmy Buffett Friday. We'll be back on Monday at noon for another live and local edition of The John Phillips Show. Have a great weekend, everyone, and see you on Monday.